When you let go of the need for validation from others, you tap into a level of power that most people never realize they have. Detachment is not about being cold or emotionless. It's about reclaiming your energy, your self-worth, and your peace. When you stop seeking approval, attention, or emotional security from another person, you shift the entire dynamic of the relationship. Suddenly, the person who once had control over your emotions begins to feel that control slipping away. They notice the change. They sense the shift. And they start to wonder why they are no longer the center of your universe. In life, the moment you become too invested in someone else's opinion of you, you unknowingly hand them the power to dictate your emotions. You start measuring your happiness based on their responses, their attention, their affection. You overthink their words, analyze their actions, and constantly try to adjust yourself to fit what you think they want. But the truth is, the more you try to prove your worth to someone, the more they begin to take you for granted. Why? Because people rarely value what is always available. Think about it. When something is readily accessible, it loses its appeal. People only truly appreciate what they feel they might lose. And this is where detachment becomes your greatest strength. The moment you stop overextending yourself, the moment you stop proving your worth, you change the way they see you. You become unpredictable, you become a mystery. And that mystery creates an emotional pull they can't ignore. Most people don't realize how much power they have over their relationships because they are too afraid to let go. They fear that if they stop trying, if they stop caring so much, the other person will leave. But here's the truth. If your connection with someone is built on you always being the one who gives, the one who chases, the one who accommodates, then that connection is already one-sided. And if someone is only there because of what you give, then they were never truly there for you in the first place. When you detach emotionally, something incredible happens. You no longer react to every little thing. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself, to defend yourself, or to seek validation. You operate from a place of self-assurance, knowing that your worth is not tied to another person's perception of you. And that level of confidence is magnetic. It draws people in. It makes them wonder. It makes them question. Suddenly, the person who once had your full attention starts to notice the absence of it. They start questioning why you're not reacting the way you used to. They start feeling a sense of unease because they realize they are no longer in control of the situation. And that's when obsession begins to take root. When you were always available, when you were always eager, they had no reason to chase. But now that you have pulled back, now that you have reclaimed your energy, they are left wondering what changed. People often think that love and attention are what makes someone value them. But the reality is, scarcity creates value. If you are too accessible, too eager, too willing to give all of yourself without hesitation, you unintentionally lower your worth in their eyes. But the moment you create space, the moment you pull back, they start to feel the absence of your energy. They start to miss what they once took for granted. When you are emotionally detached, you become harder to read. And when people can't easily predict you, they begin to crave your presence. They start thinking about you more. They start looking for signs of your attention, for any clue that they still have the same level of influence over you. But because you are no longer playing the same game, they find themselves lost in their own thoughts, wondering what they did wrong, wondering why you no longer seem as invested. This is where your power lies. It's not about manipulation. It's not about playing games. It's about understanding human psychology. People value what they feel they have to work for. When something is handed to them without effort, they take it for granted. But when they feel like they are losing something, when they sense that you are no longer seeking them out, that's when they start to chase. That's when they start to obsess. Most people never experience this shift in power because they are too afraid to let go. They fear that if they stop trying, they will lose the connection entirely. But the opposite is often true. When you stop seeking, you become sought after. When you stop needing, you become the one who is needed. When you stop proving, you become undeniable. Think about the times in your life when you have been most desired, most pursued. Chances are it wasn't when you were desperately trying to win someone over. It was when you were focused on yourself, on your own growth, on your own peace. It was when you were naturally radiating confidence, when you were operating from a place of self-love. That energy is what makes you magnetic. And that energy is what draws people in. The key to making someone obsessed with you isn't about trying harder. It's about doing less. It's about understanding that your energy is valuable, your attention is valuable, your presence is valuable. And the moment you recognize that value, the moment you stop giving it away so freely, people start to crave what they once overlooked. Emotional detachment is the art of reclaiming your power. It is the realization that you do not need to prove your worth to anyone. It is the ability to walk away with your head held high, knowing that your happiness is not dependent on someone else's approval. And when you master that mindset, you become someone they can't ignore. When you stop pouring your energy into someone, they begin to notice the void you leave behind. At first, they may not react immediately. They might assume that you're just having a bad day or that you're playing hard to get. But as time passes and your presence no longer dominates their reality, something shifts within them. They begin to feel a sense of unease, a gnawing curiosity that grows into obsession. They start questioning why your attention is no longer directed at them, why your emotions no longer seem tied to their actions. This is the beginning of a psychological chase they never expected to find themselves in. When you were constantly available, when you always responded immediately, when you went out of your way to make sure they felt secure in your presence, they had no reason to think about you deeply. You were a certainty, a predictable presence that required no extra thought. But when you remove yourself, when you stop engaging in the same way, they suddenly feel the shift. They may not be able to articulate it, but they sense something is different. And that difference disrupts their sense of control. Human beings are wired to want what they cannot easily have. This is a fundamental truth in psychology, a concept that plays out in relationships, careers, and even material possessions. When something is scarce, it automatically gains value. When something is readily available, it loses its appeal. The moment you step back, the moment you become less accessible, you activate this deep-rooted instinct in the other person's mind. They start to crave your presence because they no longer have it on demand. Absence creates curiosity, and curiosity is the first stage of obsession. The less they know about you, the more they want to know. The more you withhold, the more they seek. Your silence speaks louder than your words ever did. They start wondering why you aren't reaching out, why you aren't reacting, why your world no longer revolves around them. And the more they wonder, the more they think about you. Their mind begins filling in the blanks, creating scenarios, overanalyzing the past, and trying to figure out what changed. They might try to tell themselves they don't care, that they are unaffected by your absence. But emotions don't work that way. The human brain hates unanswered questions. It craves closure, resolution, and certainty. But when you stop engaging, when you remove yourself without explanation, you deny them that closure. You leave an open-ended question in their mind that demands an answer. And because they can't get that answer from you, they start creating their own theories. They start checking your social media, rereading old conversations, and looking for signs that you still care. They start to feel the weight of your absence in ways they never expected. Maybe it's when they go to message you and realize you haven't reached out first in days. Maybe it's when they hear a song that reminds them of you and suddenly feel an emptiness they didn't anticipate. Maybe it's when they see you moving forward with your life unbothered and it dawns on them that they no longer have the same hold over you. These moments accumulate, turning into a quiet desperation that grows stronger with time. The very thing they once took for granted now becomes something they long for. When you were always available, they didn't have to think twice about your presence. But now that you've pulled back, they can't help but notice the space you used to occupy. They realize that your energy, your attention, your presence was something they depended on more than they admitted. And once that realization sets in, it's hard for them to shake. They may try to distract themselves, throwing themselves into other interactions, keeping busy, pretending they don't notice the void. But no matter how much they try, the unanswered question lingers. Why did you stop caring? What changed? Did they misjudge your feelings? Were they never as important to you as they assumed? This uncertainty begins to eat away at them. It's ironic because in the past they had all the power. They were the ones who dictated the pace of the interaction, the ones who felt secure knowing you would always be there. But the second you pull back, the entire dynamic shifts. Now they are the ones waiting, the ones hoping, the ones wondering. They are now in the position you once occupied, overanalyzing, feeling uncertain, and wanting something they no longer have easy access to. This is the power of absence. It forces the other person to acknowledge your value in ways they never did when you were constantly present. It makes them see what life feels like without your energy, without your attention, without the certainty of your presence. And that realization creates an emotional pull stronger than anything you could have achieved by chasing, convincing, or trying to prove your worth. They will begin to notice the difference in their daily life, the moments they once took for granted. Your good morning texts, your thoughtful gestures, your undivided attention are now gone. And with each passing day, the weight of that absence grows heavier. They start remembering the times when you were there for them, the ways you made them feel special, the energy you brought into their life, and suddenly they begin to question why they didn't appreciate it more when they had it. Obsession doesn't happen overnight. It starts subtly, as a passing thought that turns into a recurring one. It builds gradually, fueled by unanswered questions and unfulfilled expectations. They don't realize it at first, but slowly they start craving your presence. They start looking for signs of your interest. They start hoping you'll reach out, that you'll give them even the smallest hint that you still care. But when you don't, when you continue to hold your ground, their obsession only grows stronger. They may try to provoke a reaction from you, testing whether they still have influence over your emotions. They might send a vague message, post something on social media meant to catch your attention, or try to make you jealous. But their actions are no longer about genuine connection. They are about regaining control. They want to know that they still matter, that they still have a hold on you. But the moment you refuse to engage, the moment you remain unbothered, you solidify your position of power. People don't value what they can easily have. They value what they feel they are losing. And when you step back, when you become less accessible, they begin to feel that loss in ways they never expected. When you stop reacting emotionally to someone, you take away their power over your mind. People are used to receiving a certain level of emotional engagement from you, whether it's positive or negative. Every reaction you give is energy that fuels their influence over you. When they do something hurtful and you respond with anger, sadness, or frustration, they know they still have control. When they ignore you and you chase them, they see their importance in your life. Every emotional response you give reinforces their sense of power. But when you stop reacting, when you detach yourself emotionally, something profound happens. They lose their hold over you. And in turn, they begin to crave the very attention they once dismissed. Emotional reactions are a form of validation. When someone sees that they can trigger an emotional response in you, they feel significant. Even if your reaction is negative, it still tells them that they matter in your world. But when you become indifferent, when you no longer react to their words, their actions, or their absence, they begin to feel irrelevant. The human ego cannot handle irrelevance. It thrives on importance, on knowing that it has an effect. When you stop giving them that assurance, their sense of control starts to crumble. They start questioning their place in your life, wondering why they no longer have the influence they once did. At first, they may try to test you, pushing buttons that used to provoke a response. They might say things designed to get a rise out of you, act in ways that once triggered you, or try to create situations that force you to react. This is a desperate attempt to regain control, to see if they still have power over your emotion. But when you remain unmoved, when you don't give them the reaction they expect, they start to panic. They begin to realize that something has changed. You are no longer emotionally invested in the same way, and that realization unsettles them. Indifference is more powerful than anger. Anger shows that you still care, that you are still emotionally tied to the situation. But indifference? Indifference signals detachment. It tells them that they no longer hold a significant place in your mind. It tells them that their presence or absence does not dictate your emotional state. And nothing is more disturbing to someone who once felt in control than realizing they no longer affect you. They start questioning everything. Did they push you too far? Did they underestimate your strength? Were they wrong about how much you cared? These doubts begin to take root in their mind, creating an internal struggle that eats away at them. When you were emotionally reactive, they knew where they stood with you. Your reactions gave them a sense of certainty, a roadmap of your feelings. But when you remove those reactions, you leave them in the dark. And the human brain hates uncertainty. It craves answers. It seeks closure. When they can no longer predict your emotions, they become obsessed with understanding what changed. They replay past interactions, searching for clues. They try to analyze whether they miscalculated your level of attachment. They start wondering if you've moved on, if you've found something or someone else that occupies your attention. And the more they wonder, the more they spiral into their own insecurity. Detachment forces people to confront their own behavior. When you are constantly reacting, they have an easy way out. They can justify their actions by blaming your emotional response. They can shift the focus away from themselves and onto you. But when you no longer engage, they are left alone with their own thoughts. They are forced to sit with their own actions, with no distractions, no emotional outbursts to shift the blame onto. And that is an uncomfortable place for most people to be. They are faced with the reality of their own choices, forced to acknowledge that the dynamic has shifted. In many cases, people only realize the value of what they had when it is no longer available. When you were reactive, they knew you were emotionally invested. They could take you for granted, knowing that no matter what they did, you would still be there, still engaging, still giving them attention. But the moment you withdraw that energy, they feel the void. They begin to miss the emotional intensity, the certainty of your reactions. They begin to crave what they once dismissed. And this craving turns into obsession. They may start finding ways to provoke you, to get any form of reaction, just to reassure themselves that they still matter. They might try to make you jealous, try to involve other people to get a response, or even pretend they don't care in an attempt to trigger you. But these are all desperate tactics, driven by the fear that they have lost their grip on you. The more you resist engaging, the more they become trapped in their own game. They thought they were in control, but now they're the ones reacting, the ones overanalyzing, the ones desperate for validation. Emotional control is the ultimate power in any dynamic. The one who controls their emotions controls the situation. When you master detachment, When you remove the emotional fuel that once kept the dynamic alive, you become untouchable. They can no longer manipulate you with their words or actions. They can no longer rely on your reactions to validate their importance. They are left in a state of confusion, uncertainty, and ultimately desperation. This shift in power is not about playing games or seeking revenge. It is about reclaiming your peace, about refusing to be controlled by external forces. It is about realizing that your emotional well-being is in your hands, not in the hands of someone who once took you for granted. When you stop reacting, when you become emotionally neutral, you send a clear message. You are no longer a pawn in their game. And once they realize that, once they feel the full impact of your absence, they are left with only one option: to chase what they once ignored. The moment you shift your focus from them to yourself, everything changes. When someone has held your attention for too long, whether through love, admiration, frustration, or pain, they become a central figure in your mind. Your thoughts revolve around them. You wonder what they're thinking, what they're doing, and if they still care. This constant preoccupation fuels their power over you, even when they aren't physically present. But the moment you redirect that energy back to yourself, something powerful happens. The weight they held in your life begins to dissolve, and they feel that shift more than you realize. People sense when they are no longer your priority. They notice when your energy, which was once directed at them, is now being invested elsewhere. It unsettles them because it disrupts the dynamic they became accustomed to. They were used to being the center of your attention. They knew you cared, that you were waiting, that you were hoping for something, whether it was a response, an apology, or a reconciliation. But the second your focus turns inward, their sense of importance starts to wane, and that change triggers something deep within them. When you make yourself your main priority, your energy shifts. Instead of waking up wondering about them, you wake up thinking about your goals. Instead of replaying past conversations, you start planning your future. Instead of scrolling through their social media, you immerse yourself in activities that elevate you. This shift is not just internal, it radiates outward. You start to carry yourself differently. Your body language changes. You speak with more confidence. You make decisions that align with your best interests rather than being influenced by emotions tied to them. People are drawn to energy. And when your energy is focused on yourself, you become magnetic. The very thing that once made them feel secure, your attention, has now become uncertain. They start questioning why you no longer react the way you used to, why you no longer reach out, why you no longer seem affected. And because human nature is wired to seek validation, they start seeking yours. The absence of your attention creates a void, and that void forces them to acknowledge your value in a way they never did before. When you focus on yourself, your self-worth strengthens. You begin to see that your value was never dependent on their recognition of it. You realize that the power you once gave them was always yours to reclaim. And as you rebuild, as you invest in yourself, you grow beyond the version of yourself that once sought their approval. This is where the real transformation happens. You no longer operate from a place of lack. You no longer need them to acknowledge you to feel whole. Your confidence, your happiness, your sense of self, it all becomes independent of them. The irony is that people are most drawn to what they feel they can't fully have. When you are emotionally invested in them, they knew you were accessible. They knew they had a place in your thoughts. But when you detach and start focusing on your own growth, you become unpredictable. Uncertainty is one of the most powerful psychological triggers. When they are unsure of where they stand with you, they start to chase clarity. They try to understand what changed, why you are no longer seeking them, why their presence or absence no longer affects you the way it once did. This shift does not happen overnight. It takes conscious effort to pull your energy back from someone who once occupied so much of your mental and emotional space. But the more you prioritize yourself, the more natural it becomes. The thoughts of them begin to fade. Their actions lose their grip on your emotions. You stop looking for signs of their interest or validation. Instead, you start seeing signs of your own progress. You start feeling more at peace. Your mind becomes clearer. Your sense of direction becomes stronger. And as you elevate yourself, you begin to attract different experiences, different opportunities, and different people. People who recognize your value without you having to prove it. This is the ultimate realization. You were never supposed to wait for someone else to recognize your worth. You were supposed to recognize it yourself. You were supposed to focus on becoming the best version of yourself, not for them, not to make them regret, but because you deserve it. And in doing so, you naturally create a gravitational pull that makes them notice in a way they never did before. People do not obsess over what they take for granted. They obsess over what they can no longer control. When you focus on yourself, you shift the balance. You stop being someone who waits and start being someone who moves forward. The energy they once received from you is now being poured into something far greater, your own growth, your own success, your own fulfillment. And the moment they sense that they are no longer the center of your world, that is when they begin to realize exactly what they lost. When you stop reacting, you reclaim your power. Every time you respond emotionally, whether through anger, sadness, frustration, or desperation, you give someone else control over your state of mind. You allow them to dictate your mood, your peace, and your sense of self. But when you become indifferent, when their words, actions, or absence no longer provoke a reaction, you take back the authority that was always meant to be yours. People thrive on reactions. They rely on knowing that what they do affects you, that their presence or lack thereof can shake you. This is not always intentional, but it is deeply ingrained in human psychology. The more predictable your reactions are, the more they believe they have influence over you. They expect a response. They anticipate a reaction. And when they don't get it, it unsettles them. Silence is more powerful than any argument, any long-winded explanation, or any emotional outburst. It forces them to sit with their own thoughts rather than feeding off of yours. Indifference is not about pretending you don't care. It is about genuinely reaching a place where their actions no longer dictate your emotions. This does not happen overnight, but it is a process of mental training. It begins with recognizing your patterns. How often do you react instinctively to things that don't serve you? How much energy do you waste replaying scenarios in your mind, imagining different outcomes, or crafting responses in your head? The more you become aware of how your reactions drain you, the more you understand the necessity of detachment. Detachment is not coldness. It is emotional discipline. It is the ability to observe without internalizing, to acknowledge without engaging, to witness without absorbing. It is a silent strength that few possess because most people are ruled by their emotions. When you detach, you create a buffer between yourself and external circumstances. You no longer respond impulsively. You no longer engage in unnecessary conflict. And you no longer allow others to manipulate your state of being through their behavior. When someone expects a reaction and receives nothing, it forces them to reflect. They wonder why you no longer respond the way you used to. They question whether they still hold the same significance in your life. This is where the shift begins. When they were certain of your reactions, they felt secure in their position. But when you no longer play into the dynamic they relied upon, uncertainty sets in. And uncertainty creates intrigue. It makes them more curious, more fixated, more obsessed. Silence is a response. It speaks volumes without saying a word. It is one of the most powerful forms of communication because it forces the other person to sit with their own emotions rather than projecting them onto you. When you remove your reactions, they are left alone with their own thoughts. They begin to analyze. They start questioning what changed, why they no longer have the same effect on you, and whether they have lost access to your emotions. This realization creates a sense of urgency in their mind. People crave control, and when they feel they are losing it, they act out. They might reach out unexpectedly, try to provoke you, or attempt to reestablish the patterns they were once familiar with. But your strength lies in not falling back into those patterns. Your ability to remain composed, to stay detached, to continue moving forward without allowing their actions to influence you, is what ultimately shifts the power dynamic. The moment you master your reactions, you become untouchable. You no longer engage in unnecessary battles. You stop justifying yourself. You quit explaining your decisions. You refuse to be baited into discussions that serve no purpose other than to drain you. You no longer waste time proving your worth to people who should have seen it from the start. This is where you truly begin to elevate, where you move with a quiet confidence that does not need validation from anyone. People are addicted to emotional responses. When they can no longer get one from you, they are forced to chase what they once took for granted. They become preoccupied with figuring out how to get your attention again, how to make you react, how to pull you back into the emotional chaos you once lived in. And the more they chase, the more they realize that the dynamic has shifted completely. Mastering your emotions is one of the most powerful things you can do for yourself. When you are no longer controlled by your impulses, when you do not react out of habit, when you are no longer predictable in your responses, you become someone that others cannot easily influence. You move with a presence that demands respect, not through words, but through energy. You become someone whose value is no longer determined by how much attention you give, but by the peace and power you carry within yourself. When you stop chasing, you shift the entire dynamic of power. People are drawn to what feels just out of reach, to what they cannot fully grasp, to what they are uncertain about. The moment you stop seeking approval, stop running after someone, stop craving their attention, they start to feel the weight of your absence in a way they never expected. They begin to wonder why the person who once seemed so invested, so available, so eager, is no longer making an effort. That curiosity turns into concern, and that concern turns into obsession. Human psychology is wired for pursuit. People value what they have to earn, what they have to work for, what they feel they might lose. When you are constantly seeking their validation, when you are always available, always responding, always reacting, they never had to question their place in your life. They never had to put in effort because they knew you would always be there. But when you remove yourself from that cycle, when you no longer give them the satisfaction of knowing they have you whenever they want, you create a space that demands their attention. The absence of your energy is far more powerful than the presence of your desperation. When you pull back, when you stop initiating, when you stop trying to prove your worth, you force the other person to sit with the reality of what it feels like without you. They begin to realize that the constant messages, the eagerness, the emotional availability were not just habits, they were privileges. And privileges, when taken for granted, can be lost. That loss is what triggers an emotional reaction in them. People do not truly appreciate something until they fear they might lose it. It is in human nature to assume that what is consistent will always remain. But when consistency is replaced with silence, when certainty is replaced with mystery, the mind cannot help but fixate on what changed. This is why the moment you stop chasing, they start obsessing. Their mind races to fill in the blanks. Did you meet someone else? Did you lose interest? Did they miscalculate your importance in their life? These questions become intrusive thoughts that they cannot escape. The shift in power is subtle yet profound. Before, they held the upper hand because they knew you would always reach out, always care, always be there. But now, They are the ones checking their phone, overanalyzing your actions, waiting for a sign of your attention. Their ego, once so secure, begins to crack under the weight of uncertainty. They start to feel the discomfort that you once felt, the longing for something they can no longer control. And in that moment, you become the one who is chased. The beauty of this transformation is that it is not about playing games or manipulating emotions. It is about reclaiming your self-respect, about valuing yourself enough to walk away from dynamics where you are undervalued. When you stop chasing, you make a statement. I am enough on my own. That confidence is magnetic. People are drawn to those who do not need them, who do not seek validation, who do not depend on external approval to feel whole. This is why detachment is so powerful. When you detach from the need for someone's attention, you no longer act from a place of scarcity. You no longer tolerate being treated as an option. You no longer accept less than what you deserve. And the irony is, the moment you embrace this mindset, the very people who once dismissed you start to take notice. They feel your shift. They sense your withdrawal. And it bothers them more than they will ever admit. They may try to test you to see if they still have control, to see if you will break the silence. They may throw breadcrumbs, small messages, half-hearted gestures, attempts to reignite your interest. But when you no longer respond the way they expect, when their attempts are met with indifference rather than eagerness, they begin to spiral. The obsession deepens because they no longer recognize the version of you they once knew. This is when you realize the true power of your self-worth. You were never meant to chase. You were never meant to beg for attention, to wait for someone to acknowledge you, to prove your value to someone who should have seen it from the start. You were meant to be pursued, to be chosen, to be prioritized effortlessly. And when you stop chasing, you make space for the right energy to come into your life. People who see your worth without needing you to remind them. The most attractive force in the world is a person who is complete within themselves, who does not chase, who does not need external validation to feel whole. This is the energy that draws people in, that creates desire, that turns the tables without you ever having to lift a finger. The more you focus on yourself, on your own growth, on your own happiness, the more they begin to realize what they lost when you walked away. And once that realization sets in, the obsession begins.